Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about macros and fat loss. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, when this stuff comes up, people always say stuff like, Jason, why should we listen to you? You're not ripped. I don't want to listen to a fat guy talk about diet. Honestly, man, guys, I'm not actually fat right now, not medically, not by any standard other than competitive bodybuilding. And I'm not a fan of competitive bodybuilding, and I hope bodybuilders aren't particularly hanging out on this channel. This is not the channel for you. But you guys know I've lost over 100 pounds of fat before. When I first started YouTube, I was sick. I spent 10 months in bed, maybe a year, something in that range. Couldn't train for several years medically, and I got really sick, got depressed, gained a bunch of weight. I've lost a lot of fat. At this point, as of this year, I was in the 250s earlier this year, fat power lifter. I did a DEXA scan when I got down to 239, showing me at like 23.7% body fat. I'm down another 21 pounds since that first DEXA scan, right? I'm at 218 and still dropping, and I'm probably going to go down under 200 pounds. And here's kind of the point with that. I am successfully losing body fat. To quantify that, of people saying, oh, you don't know anything about fat loss, really? I've lost over 30 pounds of weight this year while still continuing to lift really heavy and do heavy squats, deadlifts, bench presses, weighted pull-ups, all that stuff. Still reasonably strong, I think, by anybody's standards. Not just for my age, I am reasonably strong by any gym standards, in spite of losing over 30 pounds of body weight and still losing more, right? I have a game plan for that. So when it comes down to this whole idea of, people always ask me, what are your macros? I'm like, I don't count macros. I don't believe macros actually matter to the degree that people think they do. I think counting your exact macros is, how do I put this, for people who are obsessive compulsive. It works for people who need to have that sort of, feel like they have that sort of control over everything, but it's not really relevant to your fat loss. In other words, where you choose to fill in your calories, whether it's carbs or fat, doesn't matter significantly. It makes a little bit of difference. It doesn't matter significantly in terms of the actual amount of fat you're losing. What matters is total calories and your protein. That's really all that matters. And that's not me, that's the vast majority of studies. This is, when I say studies, guys, we're like, could you link some? No, because you guys could Google and probably find enough studies on this that you could read for the next 50 hours straight and keep taking energy drinks so that you could stay at 50 hours straight, and you wouldn't even make a dent in the studies. You would barely make a dent in the scientific literature you could find in hitting a simple Google search. It's an enormous volume of information because this has been studied repeatedly, because fat loss and weight management is an enormous area of nutritional research. What has been repeatedly found is that really protein is the only macro that has a significant impact here. Everything else is largely irrelevant. In other words, when you compare, when protein is equal, getting most of your calories from carbs versus fat, it either shows the exact same amount of fat loss or a slight advantage to the higher carbs for fat loss, with a slight advantage for muscle retention for higher carbs. Does that make sense? In other words, slightly better body composition outcomes, even if body weight loss, are favorable for that. But some people need more fat in their diet to, number one, not develop nutritional deficiencies, number two, for their own satiety and taste. All right, so just all carb for your non-protein calories isn't always easy. And when we start talking about the muscle loss, here's what it comes down to. Any discrepancies on the other side of things, your carbs and fat, increasing protein can offset the negatives. In other words, protein has not only the highest thermic effect, because not all calories are equal, and when we say that, we basically are talking about protein. Carbs and fat, it's not what we're talking about. It's always the keto people who jump up and say silly stuff like, oh, not all calories are equal, but then they promote a diet that's highest in the worst calorie source in terms of that actual equation. So it's really kind of comical. The only people who should be screaming not all calories are equal are people who are promoting ultra high protein, because they're technically right. They're right. Those calories are processed differently. They have different thermic effects. They have different energy things involved in energy deficits that are created just in converting them to fuel sources like glucose and things, right? It's a different animal. But protein staves off muscle loss. So even if a person ran their carbs lower, they could offset the muscle loss that you see in the high fat versus the high carb just by increasing their protein. So that, keto loses there because high protein is not keto. But to defend those people, even when it comes down to health things, we could say things like ketogenic diets are bad for your health, and they are. But not when you're losing weight. When you're actually technically losing weight on the keto diet, your blood work looks great. Even those sort of diets that we would look at and say, that's pretty bad for health. Well, truth be told, the negative blood markers you see from long-term ketogenic diets are usually when people are eating enough to start gaining body fat again, when their caloric surplus comes back, because it doesn't let you bypass calories. People who are in a caloric deficit on ketogenic diets don't see the negative health markers in their blood work at that time. So technically, even if someone is losing weight on that, now you're going to lose more muscle, it's crappy, but you'll still not even see the negative health markers there until you stop losing weight. In which case you probably better get off that diet at that point if you care about your health. But the point being, what really seems to matter the most in terms of fat loss and shifts in body composition is protein and calories. And the point I'm making is that there is no need to be so dogmatic about your macros. Because in other words, people are like, I need this amount of carbs and this amount of fat. And they end up really restricting what they can eat and have to do a lot more tracking that may not even be accurate. When the reality is, guess what? It doesn't matter that much. If you want to eat peanut butter for most of your non-protein calories one day, rice on a different day, and fruit on a different day, does it really matter? It's not going to affect your fat loss as long as your protein is normalized and your calories are normalized. The rest of the fillers are just energy. They're just where you're getting your fuel outside of your body fat, because you're not going to survive just on your body fat. Trust me on this, guys. This is a one-way ticket to losing muscle, performance, everything else. So you need a certain caloric threshold. But here's what it comes down to. We know that's not even accurate. You can only track your calories and macros within about 10%, even with a digital scale, right? What you think is 1,000 calories of rice, well, your digital scale, even the dry weight, when you weigh it out, might be 900, it might be 1,100, it might be 850. You don't know. You're just getting a ballpark even with a digital scale. And I've covered in the past why that is. And ultimately, even if you're off and you're like, oh man, well, my calories are too low, I might lose weight too fast and lose muscle, just increasing the protein will offset the risk of that. Same thing when we come over to maybe my calories went too high and I'm not losing weight for several days because I didn't have the deficit I thought I had. Well, a higher protein intake creates a larger thermic effect, and it can create an energy deficit anyways, even if you were close, so that you're continuing to lose body fat. So ultimately, what I would say here, the real keys to fat loss with all of this is just keeping a track of your protein and an idea of your caloric intake. That is really the key at the biological level to ensuring fat loss and maximizing muscle retention to the best of your ability, right? That's ultimately what it comes down to. It's not that critical that you know exactly how much fat or carbs that you're consuming day to day. As long as your performance and satiety are on point, you can actually shift them around day to day, and it's not going to significantly impact your results. But what is going to impact your results is going to be your total caloric intake, your total caloric turnover, how much protein you're eating. Those are the actual single most important factors. That's going to determine, as far as your fat loss on the scale, muscle retention and everything else, because of course your training added in also, is going to be something like 98-99% of your results. That's the most important stuff. This other stuff is minutia that I personally think is a little too dogmatic for normal people who aren't OCD and don't have compulsive issues with their eating. And I'm not saying it's bad to track your macros, but what I'm saying is it's ultimately unnecessary for the overwhelming majority of people's body composition and fat loss goals. I'm not saying there can't be, with some fine tuning, some tiny little advantages for maybe people in a competitive environment, but for people who are non-competitors, you're not competing in a sport with weight classes, right? You're not competing in a sport. You're not going to go compete in bodybuilding or physique contest. You probably are not going to get a significant enough advantage from thinking that you know your exact macros, because you don't, to actually warrant the extra time and energy. The real things that matter are your protein intake and your calories. That's what's actually important. So when people ask me with this, since I'm down over 30 pounds, what are your macros? I don't know. I don't actually know my exact amount of carbs or fat. I don't, and I don't have set numbers. I just kind of fill in calories and protein. That's it. That's what I do, and that adjusts a little bit through the week. I don't even have set numbers for that for a month straight, right? That's a dynamic number. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time